Nowadays, he's best known as an analyst, commentator, broadcaster, whatever you want to go with. But before this, Jalen Rose put together a very good career, which often flies under the radar. He reached the height of his popularity as a member of Michigan's FAB Five in the early 90s, as arguably the most popular player on that team and one of the most popular and recognizable players in the history of college basketball. He could never quite replicate that level of popularity in the NBA, but was one of the league's better players for a decade. He was a point forward at a time when they weren't too common. He had the ball handling and playmaking ability to run the offense, but could also give you points if you needed, and do so relatively efficiently. He had great body control for someone his size and could slice through the D, but could also score from the post or the perimeter, and did all of this while being a leader. He started his career with Denver before really coming into his own under Larry Bird in Indiana, where he was a major piece of the Pacers' 2000 finals run. Once his time in Indiana was up, he bounced around teams as a reliable scorer and veteran presence, but unfortunately always seemed to be the odd one out in his later years. Yet he would still bring the same effort regardless. And although Jalen Rose will always be remembered for his time with the Fab Five alone, what needs to be remembered is how good of an NBA player he really was. So that's why today's episode is looking at that entire career. Let's jog your memory. A Detroit native, basketball was in Jalen Rose's blood. Although he was raised by his mother, Jean, who was a former track star, his biological father was Jimmy Walker, who was taken first overall by the Detroit Pistons in the 1967 NBA draft and made 2 All-Star teams in his career. Rose and his father never met, but they were working on their relationship before Walker passed away in 2007. Rose would attend Southwestern High School, where he would team with other future NBA players like Howard Isley and Vashawn Leonard. Rose would choose to wear number 42 in high school to show that he was nothing like his dad, who wore 24. Throughout Rose's time at Southwestern, he would get very used to winning, as he helped lead the team to 3 city championships and back-to-back state championships as a junior in 1990 and a senior in 1991. During his junior season, he would score 21 points and pull down 12 rebounds during the state title game versus Saginaw, as he was named a 4th team parade All-American. Then in 91, he would record 25 points and 18 rebounds in a win over Detroit Northern in the state title game, this time finishing the year as a 2nd team parade All-American and a McDonald's All-American. At this point, Jalen Rose was already one of the biggest names in the state, and his popularity was growing quickly, and he would stay loyal to his home state by committing to play for Michigan going into the 92 NCAA season. But the Rose commitment was just the tip of the iceberg. Rose would be one member of arguably the most well-known freshman recruiting class of all time. Michigan cleaned up in securing some of the best talent in the nation, as they had also received commitments from a 6'6" guard out of Johnson High in Austin, Texas, named Ray Jackson, a 6'5" guard out of Plano East in Plano, Texas, named Jimmy King, a 6'9" forward out of Chicago Vocational in Chicago, named Juwan Howard, and the National Player of the Year from Detroit Country Day in forward Chris Webber. And the potential Webber-Rose duo was the most exciting, as the two had been friends since they were kids, yet they had very different high school paths, with Webber attending a private school and Rose attending a public school. With this recruiting class, who would soon be dubbed the Fab Five, the Wolverines became one of the hottest tickets in all of sports, as they were not only must-see basketball, they were must-see TV, but it was more than just their play that made them popular, as their attitude on and off the court, as well as their choices to wear baggy shorts, black socks, and black shoes, extended their reach well beyond basketball and made them cultural icons, as they were completely going against the grain of what college basketball, with a poster boy like Duke's squeaky clean Christian Laettner, was trying to represent. But what likely frustrated NCAA officials even more was that the Wolverines were good, really good. Although Webber was the most coveted prospect, it was Rose who was often referred to as the leader, as well as the heart and soul of the team, and he would play as such. During his 92 freshman year, Rose would lead the team in scoring and assists while shooting over 48% from the field, as he would finish top 10 in the Big Ten in both scoring and assists, and set a Michigan freshman record with 597 total points. Rose, Webber, and Howard combined to average over 44 points per game. The team would start the year 9-1, with their only loss coming in overtime to the Duke Blue Devils. The Wolverines would eventually start all 5 freshmen this year, with Rose's unique skill set allowing him to play the point at 6'8". But they were still a young team with a lot of learning to do, yet from a talent perspective, there weren't many teams that could hold up to them, as they would finish the regular season at 20-8, with the season highlight coming on March 8th, when they defeated number 2 ranked Indiana. The Wolverines would rank as high as 11th in the nation, but would end the year ranked number 15. They would finish 3rd in the Big Ten and would be a 6th seed going into the NCAA tournament. The first round would see Michigan defeat Temple, as Rose finished with 19 points and 8 assists on 6 of 8 shooting. Round 2 brought East Tennessee State, as Rose finished with a double-double, recording 19 points and 10 assists on 6 of 11 shooting. The Sweet 16 brought Oklahoma State, as Rose continued his great tourney with 25 points and 11 rebounds on 8 of 14 shooting. Then in the Elite 8 versus Ohio State, he would have 20 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals, setting up a Final Four matchup versus Cincinnati. Rose would struggle with just 13 points on 4 of 13 shooting, but he would add 9 rebounds, as the Wolverines won by 4 to punch their ticket to a national championship matchup versus Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, Bobby Hurley, and the Duke Blue Devils. Unfortunately, Duke won easily, as they held Michigan to 51 total points on less than 38% team shooting. Rose would be one of 2 Wolverines to record double figures, as he had 11 points and 4 assists on 5 of 9 shooting, but struggled with foul trouble most of the game, as Michigan came up short. But for his freshman season, Rose averaged about 17.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Rose's confidence, and at times defiance, wasn't appreciated by the NCAA and some fans, as he, along with the other Michigan starters, were sometimes unfairly seen as thugs. So even though Rose was a good kid, lots of people were looking for opportunities to discredit him, and in a wrong place, wrong time situation, he would give them an opportunity, as he was present in a house when it was raided by cops due to suspected drug distribution on October 4th, 1992. However, Rose was only there to help a friend and was never arrested and only cited for loitering, but this was still going to cast a bigger shadow on him than it would on most. Yet Rose would take accountability and apologize for being present, and Michigan would stand behind their young star. Michigan began the 93 season as the top-ranked team in the nation, but would frustratingly lose yet again to Duke in the second game of the year. Over the course of the rest of the regular season, they would only lose 3 more games, as they finished the year at 26-4. Rose was again one of the top performers, finishing as the team's second leading scorer and top distributor, as he, Weber, and Howard would combine for nearly 50 points per game as part of the 33rd best scoring offense in the nation. Rose would be a top 15 scorer and top 10 passer in the conference, as the Wolverines would finish second in the Big Ten with a 15-3 record. But overall, they would finish the year as the 3rd-ranked team in the nation and make their return to the NCAA tournament as a 1 seed. Rose would only have 9 points in the first round, but this was more due to running through Coastal Carolina. The second round would be a 2-point overtime win versus UCLA, as Rose would play 40 minutes and record 12 points and 8 assists on 4 of 11 shooting. The Sweet 16 would bring a defeat of George Washington, with Rose recording 16 points, 6 assists, and 3 steals. This would bring an Elite 8 matchup versus Temple, as Rose would put up 17 points and 5 rebounds on over 62% shooting, as the Wolverines were back in the Final Four, this time taking on Kentucky, who they would defeat by 3 points in overtime, as Rose put up 18 points and 6 rebounds. And now a more experienced Wolverines team would get another shot at a national title, but this time against another ACC opponent. Rose wouldn't play great, as he would finish with 12 points and 4 assists, yet would shoot below 42% and commit 6 turnovers. But the game was much closer, and with about 11 seconds left, Michigan was down by 2, but then one of the most infamous moments in sports occurred.
Michigan will have to bring it.
He walked and the referee missed it.
Weber brings it into the front court. They have no timeouts remaining.
He causes too many timeouts. That's a technical foul.
After pulling down a rebound, Chris Weber already dodged a bullet when he wasn't called for what looked like a travel. He would then drive down the court towards his bench and call a timeout. Only problem was, Michigan didn't have any timeouts, resulting in a technical foul, which allowed North Carolina to ice the game and send Michigan home without a title for the 2nd straight year. But for the regular season, Rose would average about 15.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Going into the 94 season, the Wolverines were no longer the Fab Five, as Weber had left to become the #1 pick in the 93 NBA draft. The now 4 juniors scored the majority of the Wolverines' points this year, with Rose finishing 2nd on the team and 5th in the conference in scoring, while also leading the team in assists and finishing top 15 in the conference. And his 36 minutes per game would be the 2nd highest in the conference, as he would be voted 1st team All-Big Ten and a consensus 2nd team All-American. The Wolverines started the season ranked 5th in the nation and would win their first 5 games, but would then go just 6-4 over their next 10, as overall they would finish the year at 21-7. They were also 20-4 with 4 games left in the year, but would lose 3 of those games. And in the last game of the season, Michigan was tied with Purdue for first in the Big Ten Conference, but would lose to an unranked Northwestern team in overtime and finish second in the conference, marking the 3rd straight season that Michigan had failed to win the Big Ten championship. Nonetheless, they would enter the NCAA tournament as a 3 seed, but Rose would struggle. They would defeat Pepperdine by just 4 points in overtime in round 1, behind 28 from Howard, as Rose would put up 13, 7, and 7, but would do so on 2 of 13 from the field. The second round would be another close defeat of Texas, with Michigan again being led by Howard. Rose would play better, as he would put up 17 points and 5 assists on 4 of 9 shooting, yet would commit 7 turnovers. They would defeat Maryland in the Sweet 16, as Rose would have 16, 5, and 4, but would shoot just 5 of 12 from the field, setting up an Elite 8 matchup versus Arkansas. But this is where their tournament would come to an end. Howard would again dominate, but the rest of the Michigan team couldn't put up the same production. Rose would have 13 points and 8 rebounds, but did so on just 5 of 19 shooting, as Arkansas won by 8. And for the regular season, Rose averaged about 20 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Just a few weeks after the tournament, and a day after Howard would do the same, Jalen Rose would declare for the 1994 NBA draft. There was a bit of uncertainty of which position Rose would play after always playing point guard in college, but being the size of an NBA small forward. And even though he fell out of the top 10, his upside couldn't be passed on for too long.
With the 13th pick in the 1994 NBA draft, the Denver Nuggets select Jalen Rose from the University of Michigan.
Rose was selected by a Denver Nuggets team who had just made history as the first 8 seed to defeat a 1 seed in the playoffs. The Nuggets were a young team led by Dikembe Mutombo, but they were also a team with a lot of capable players, meaning Rose's opportunities would be limited this year. But one thing Rose knew was that he didn't want to fall behind, as he agreed to a 6-year contract prior to training camp to avoid any sitting out. Mutombo was one of the league's top defensive players, and other than that, the Nuggets were a team comprised of a lot of solid players who worked well together, as they had 7 players average double figures this year. The Nuggets had also signed a small forward in the offseason in sharpshooter Dale Ellis, who would further cut into potential playing time for Rose. Denver had finished at 42-40 last year, and although they finished with just 1 less win this year, it was an unstable season, as guard Robert Pack would miss about half the year with injury, while forward LaFonso Ellis would play just 6 games due to injury, and the team would go through 3 coaches as well, as head coach Dan Issel stepped down after an 18-16 start, and then the team would go just 3-13 under interim coach Gene Littles, before GM Bernie Bickerstaff would step in for the final 32 games and go 20-12. Although Rose didn't have a huge role, he was a regular part of the rotation, averaging over 22 minutes per game in 81 appearances. And during Little's brief stint, Rose was made a starter, and Bickerstaff would keep him in the starting lineup once he took over. Rose would still manage double figures in 32 games, and would record 13 games with at least 10 assists and 8 double-doubles, which included a 14-point, 16-assist game in a March 16th win versus Sacramento. And his great rookie play would get him voted to the NBA Rising Stars game, where he would have 12 points and 6 assists, as he would ultimately be named second-team All-Rookie. The Nuggets' 41-41 record would be enough for a playoff matchup with San Antonio, but the Spurs would make quick work of Denver in a 3-game sweep, as Rose would average 10 points and 6 assists as a starter across the 3 games, recording double figures in 2 games and double-digit assists in 1 game. But for his rookie season, he put up about 8 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. During the 95 offseason, the Nuggets added a big piece in high-flying forward Antonio McDyess to pair alongside Mutombo in the front court. A full season of Bickerstaff would see Rose begin the year as a starter, yet be relegated to a bench role after just a few games, only to be reinserted into the starting lineup for the final 25 games of the year. The team's best scorer was Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, but he would play just 57 games this year and see his play decrease dramatically after controversially choosing to sit during the national anthem for religious reasons. Rose would get about 4.5 more minutes per game and respond by upping his scoring, rebounding, and assist numbers, as his career-high 6.2 assists per game would be second on the team and a top 20 mark in the league, and his 48% shooting would also be a career high, as it seemed the Nuggets team with a core of Rose, Mutombo, and McDyess had a bright future. Rose would hit double figures in 46 games and record 9 double-doubles, but the team just wasn't able to string together any meaningful win streaks, as they finished at 35-47 and missed the playoffs. But Rose's sophomore year saw him put up about 10 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 6 assists per game. Mutombo was a free agent, and he decided to leave Denver and sign with Atlanta, and maybe that was partially influenced by what happened about a month before that, as Rose was included in a trade with Indiana, which saw the Nuggets receive Mark Jackson and Ricky Pierce. As just like that, a potential trio in Denver was done after 1 year. The Pacers were coming off a disappointing first-round playoff exit and were looking to switch things up by adding a versatile player like Rose. And while Rose probably thought he was in line for a great opportunity, Pacers coach Larry Brown had other ideas. Rose struggled to find his place on the team, with Reggie Miller and Derek McKee on the wings, and Brown opting to start Travis Best at point guard. And it became even more difficult for Rose to find his role when he wouldn't even get a chance to play, as he logged 14 DNPs this year, while only receiving 18 minutes per game in 66 appearances. He would record just 23 games in double figures and would fail to reach double-digit assists even once. But Best wasn't having a great year as the team starter, yet instead of giving Rose a chance to man the offense, in an interesting move, the Pacers would trade to reacquire Jackson from the Nuggets, who would obviously slide right back into the starting point guard spot that he had occupied last year. The trade came with the Pacers sitting at 25-27, but even with the re-addition of Jackson, they only went 14-16 the rest of the way, as they finished 39-43 and missed the playoffs. And for the regular season, Rose averaged about 7.5 points, 2 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Larry Brown had taken the Pacers to back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals in 94 and 95, but the team had been regressing ever since. So during the offseason, he resigned, and to replace him, Indiana would hire a local and NBA legend in former Celtics great Larry Bird. Up to this point, Rose had been seen as more of a disappointment, a bit of a tweener whose body is more suited for small forward, but whose skill set was more suited for point guard, but hadn't yet excelled at either in the NBA. But this past season had been his worst. Yet no matter what he did, Larry Brown wouldn't have played him due to his perceived cockiness. Yet instead of complain, all Rose did was work until he got an opportunity, which Bird would give him in time. The Pacers had also picked up Chris Mullin in the offseason, and with a full year of Jackson and an overall healthy team, they quickly re-entered the conversation as a contender to make it out of the East. Rose continued to come off the bench, playing more small forward, as he would appear in all 82 games this year. He would see his points and shooting efficiency increase and would hit double figures in 36 games, yet would be unable to record double-digit assists in any game. But the Pacers were back with an improved offense and defense, and they would string together multiple streaks of 5 or more wins, as they were sitting at 33-13 at the All-Star break and would proceed to go 25-11 the rest of the way, including winning 7 of their last 8 to finish the year at 58-24 and get a first-round matchup with Cleveland. The Pacers would win in 4, but Rose would struggle, as he would shoot 40% or less in 3 games and crack double figures just once, with his best performance coming in Game 2, when he had 17 points on 7 of 8 shooting. The second round brought a familiar foe in the New York Knicks, but with their star center Patrick Ewing not playing at 100%, the Pacers were able to beat New York in 5 games. Rose would start great, with a game-high 18 to go along with 5 assists and 3 steals in a Game 1 win, but would then average about 5 points and less than 1 assist on 40% shooting over the final 4 games. But the Pacers were back in the conference finals to play a Michael Jordan-led Bulls team, and the Pacers would end up giving Chicago all they could handle. Rose had a slow start, scoring just 9 points across games 1 and 2, which were both Pacers losses. But he would then average 11.5 points and 3.5 assists on over 50% shooting across games 3 and 4, which were both Indiana wins, with Rose putting up 15 in Game 3 and hitting 2 fourth-quarter threes to bring Indiana within 3 points in Game 4, a game which Reggie Miller would eventually famously hit a 3 to give the Pacers the win. But late in Game 4, Miller and the Bulls' Ron Harper got in a scuffle near the Bulls' bench, and Rose ended up leaving the Pacers' bench to go to Miller's aid. But this ended up hurting the team more, as Rose would be suspended for Game 5, a game in which the Pacers were blown out. Rose would have 8 points on 30% shooting in a Game 6 win, but then the Bulls would take Game 7 to end Indiana's season. And Rose would recall that he started out hot in the fourth quarter of Game 7, as he hit 2 consecutive shots, but would then be benched for the rest of the quarter by Bird. And while this is true, Bird did leave him in the game for a few minutes after making these 2 shots, but once Jordan checked back in for Chicago, Bird would elect to go with Derek McKee for the defense, even though Rose had been holding his own. Yet as Rose would remember on the team bus after the game, Bird would tell him that he made a mistake, and he should have put him back into the game. But for the regular season, Rose averaged about 9.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Indiana looked the same going into the lockout-shortened 99 season, but had added big man and floor spacer Sam Perkins. Rose continued to see his role increase as he had now been elevated to a shared sixth-man role with Antonio Davis, as he was getting over 25 minutes per game and would see himself tie with Davis for third in Sixth Man of the Year voting. He again upped his averages, yet had one of his worst shooting seasons of his career, as he barely cracked 40% from the field and shot about 26% from deep, yet he would still hit double figures in 32 games. Rose would only play in 49 games this year, as he was suspended 1 game after a March 30th incident versus New York, when he deliberately tripped Patrick Ewing, then proceeded to square up with him. Indiana's defense had taken a step back, but their offense was even better, as they would have the best offensive rating in the league and finished tied for the best record in the East at 33-17. The first round brought the Milwaukee Bucks, who the Pacers swept. Although Rose came off the bench, he got over 31 minutes per game and finished as the team's second best scorer and distributor on nearly 55% shooting. He would start lights out with 24 points on 9 of 10 shooting in Game 1, then would have 14 points and 9 assists in Game 2, before ending on a down game with just 7 points in Game 3. Round 2 brought the Philadelphia 76ers, who the Pacers would also sweep. Rose saw a decrease in minutes, but still finished as the team's third leading scorer, yet would do so on about 36% shooting, as he would have 2 games shooting 30% or lower, but would start the series strong with 27 points on over 56% shooting in Game 1. And Indiana was back in the conference finals, this time versus New York. The teams would split the first 2 games before an injury shut down Ewing for the rest of the series. But in Game 3, Larry Johnson would hit his famous 4-point play to give New York a 2-1 lead. And although Indiana would come back to even the series, they would lose Games 5 and 6 to end their year. Rose played solid, averaging about 11 points on 45% shooting, but he was up and down, as he averaged 16 points across Games 2, 4, and 6, but also averaged less than 6 points across Games 1, 3, and 5. But for the regular season, he averaged about 11 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Going into the 2000 season, Indiana was able to maintain the same core for the most part, yet did lose Antonio Davis to Toronto. But another big change was that Bird decided it was time for Rose to be a starter, as he would put him in the lineup at the position he felt best suited him, small forward. And with legit minutes night in and night out, Rose finally showed what he could do. Rose would lead the team in minutes per game at over 37 and would finish in the top 20 in the league in total minutes played. But he also became the first Pacer not named Reggie Miller to lead the team in scoring since Chuck Person in 1989, as he would also finish second on the team in assists and first in steals while shooting much more efficiently. He would hit double figures in 72 games, including 3 games with at least 30, while also recording 4 double-doubles. And his great year would see him voted the league's most improved player. The Pacers had a top 5 scoring offense and the best offensive rating in the league, as they would cruise to a 56-26 record and the top seed in the East, where they would take on the Bucks in round 1. Miller would be the team's top scorer, but Rose would be second, putting up over 19 points per game while shooting over 55% from deep. He would hit double figures in every game, including 2 games with at least 26, as the Pacers advanced in 5 games. Round 2 brought the Sixers, and Rose and Miller came to play, as in Game 1, Rose would score a postseason career high of 40 points, while Miller would score 40 of his own. Rose would follow that up with 30 in Game 2, but then would score more than 20 points just once more in a 6-game series win, as the Pacers advanced to their 3rd straight conference finals in a rematch with New York. This would be another series with a less than 100% Ewing, but this time the Pacers took advantage, as they won in 6. Rose would average about 19, 4, and 4 for the series, but would shoot below 40%. Yet the Pacers had made history and were heading to their first NBA Finals appearance in franchise history. But waiting for Indiana was a hungry Lakers team with Shaq and Kobe. However, even though they fell behind 0-2 before losing the series in 6 games, Rose had his best playoff series of his career and never showed any quit. He would average 23 points and 3 assists on over 46% from the field and 50% from deep. He started slow with 12 in Game 1, but came back with 30 in Game 2. Yet in Game 2, he would stick his foot out for Kobe to land on in hopes of injuring him, which he would later admit was intentional, as Kobe would miss Game 3 because of this, and Rose would then score 21 in a Game 3 win. Game 4 was his worst, as he had just 14 points on 5 of 16 shooting in a loss. But after this, he dropped 32 points on over 66% shooting in a blowout win to keep the Pacers alive and force a Game 6. He would have 29 in Game 6 with some clutch shooting late, but it wouldn't be enough, as LA took the game and the series. but for the regular season, Rose averaged about 18 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. After the season, Bird stepped down, which Rose wasn't happy about as he had really grown to like Bird as a coach. But another former champion and NBA legend would take his place in Isaiah Thomas. But the Pacers had some big roster changes in the offseason. Jackson would sign a free agent deal with Toronto, and Dale Davis would be traded to Portland for the younger Jermaine O'Neal, while longtime center Rik Smits would call it a career, leaving a 35-year-old Miller and 28-year-old Rose as the only returning starters. Rose and Miller continued to form a solid duo, but Rose would play the point a lot more this year. Although Rose still led the team in scoring on a then career-high average, he also led the team in assists and finished third in rebounds. His 6 assists would be top 20 in the league, and he would do all of this while remaining an efficient shooter at nearly 47% and playing nearly 41 minutes per game. Rose would miss the first 10 games of the year after breaking his wrist in the preseason, but would play every game after that, as he would have 69 games in double figures, including his first career 40-point game, when he had 42 on 17 of 29 shooting in a December 20th loss to Toronto. Additionally, he would have 9 double-doubles and even record a 20-20 game in an April 18th win versus Cleveland when he had 22 points and a career-high 20 assists. But with all their offseason losses, Indiana's offense took a big step back and finished at just 41-41. Yet this was still enough for a first-round matchup versus Philadelphia. But their season would end quickly, as after taking Game 1, Indiana lost 3 straight to lose the series. Rose played solid as he dropped at least 17 points in every game, but did so on a 38% shooting average. Yet he would lead the team in steals with 1.5 per game. But for his regular season, Rose averaged about 20.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists per game. Rose began the 0-2 season with the Pacers and was putting up his usual good numbers, and was also getting a lot of help from a significantly improved Jermaine O'Neal. Rose saw his rebound and assist numbers drop slightly, but was still only averaging about 2 turnovers per game and shooting nearly 45%. The Pacers were middle of the pack and sitting at 26-27 at the All-Star break, with Rose as their leading scorer after the 53 games. But then the player who had done so much in Indiana would be sent away. Rose was traded to Chicago as the main piece of a multiplayer deal in a trade that saw Indiana receive young guys like Brad Miller and Ron Artest. Indiana wasn't great, but Chicago was bad, as at the time of the trade they were 12-40. Rose would immediately become the top player and veteran leader of a very young Bulls team, featuring guys like Tyson Chandler, Eddie Curry, and Jamal Crawford, as he would average nearly 24 points per game on 47% from the field and 37% from deep in his remaining 30 games with the Bulls, which included his career high of 44 points on 18 of 34 shooting to go along with 11 rebounds in a March 16th double overtime defeat of Houston, where Rose hit the game-winning shot. The Bulls would finish at 21-61, with Rose accomplishing the rare feat of playing 83 games in a season, and for his overall season, he would average about 20.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. Rose would play the full 0-3 season for the Bulls, who featured the second pick of the draft in Duke point guard Jay Williams. The Bulls would also try to get Rose a bit of scoring help by signing veteran Donyell Marshall, as the two would combine for over 35 per game, with Rose averaging a career-high 22.1 points per game, as he would be a top 15 scorer in the league, and his 40.9 minutes per game would also be top 10. Rose would hit double figures in 80 games, including 14 with at least 30, while also recording 7 double-doubles and a triple-double. The Bulls improved slightly, but their 30-52 record still wasn't enough for a playoff berth, and for the regular season, Rose averaged about 22 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. An off-season motorcycle accident ended Williams' sophomore year and ultimately career, as he never played again. Crawford and Curry had taken steps forward, and with the addition of Kirk Hinrich, the Bulls were a younger team that didn't need their top veteran player to take shots away from their developing youth, and Rose was also struggling to start the year, as his scoring had dropped to about 13 per game on less than 38% shooting, while also recording a poor assist-to-turnover ratio. So after playing 16 games, Rose was traded along with Marshall to Toronto on December 1st, as the Raptors were in need of some extra scoring. Toronto still featured Vince Carter and their prized rookie draft pick in Chris Bosh, and with an injury to point guard Alvin Williams, Rose would play the remainder of the year as Toronto's starting point guard. Rose would give the team added scoring as he finished tied for second on the team in points per game on improved numbers, while also leading the team in assists. However, his shooting was still lower than hoped at about 41%. Nonetheless, he would score in double figures in 44 games with the Raptors, while also dishing out at least 10 assists on 4 separate occasions. but Rose would break his hand on February 8th and miss about 5 weeks, as overall the Raptors went 9-24 to end the year and finished at 33-49 to miss the playoffs. But for the regular season, Rose averaged about 15.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists. Rose would play the entire 05 season with Toronto and shift back to small forward after the acquisition of point guard Rafer Alston. But the Raptors' top player was unhappy and unhealthy in Toronto, as Vince Carter would only appear in 20 games for the team, before being traded to New Jersey on December 17th. The main piece the Raptors were supposed to receive in return was former DPOY Alonzo Mourning, yet he would refuse to report to the team. So on top of picks, the best players the Raptors were receiving were Aaron and Eric Williams. Bosh had taken big strides in year 2, and by the end of the year, Rose was the team's top scorer, with Bosh finishing second. Rose put up his lowest assist numbers since 1999, but his scoring had improved by 3 points compared to last season, and he would shoot over 45% from the field and nearly 40% from deep. He would still hit double figures in 69 games and record 10 games with at least 30. But with the loss of Carter and receiving nothing significant in return, the Raptors had a repeat of last year, finishing at 33-49. And for the regular season, Rose averaged about 18.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Rose began the 06 season with Toronto, but at this point he was 32, soon to be 33, and the Raptors were a team going in a younger direction, looking to build around Bosh. And Rose still had another year left on his contract after this season for nearly $17 million. He had already seen a smaller role on the team, as he appeared in 46 games but only started 22 of them, and was putting up his lowest numbers since before he was a starter in Indiana, while also seeing his efficiency drop to only about 40% shooting. And this season would also be the year that Kobe Bryant dropped 81 on the Raptors in a January 22nd game. And while Rose catches all the flack for that, Kobe was giving the whole team buckets, and Rose was actually only guarding him for 18 of those points. But then on February 3rd, Rose was traded to New York, as he was being acquired by his former coach in Indiana, who was now New York's GM. But New York's head coach was also his former coach in Indiana, except back then, Larry Brown and Jalen Rose never saw eye to eye. Yet this time, Brown had been the one that requested for Thomas to trade for Rose. The Knicks were 14-31 at the time of the trade, so their playoff hopes were all but over. Rose would appear in 26 games for the team as their starting shooting guard, where he would put up similar numbers to what he had been doing in Toronto, and would do so on about 46% from the field and over 49% from deep. But the Knicks finished at 23-59 and missed the playoffs. And for the regular season, Rose averaged about 12.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. A soon-to-be 34-year-old Rose was not part of New York's long-term plans, so they would buy him out shortly before the 07 season began. About a week later, he would sign with Phoenix, as he wanted a chance to win a title. The Suns were in the prime of their 7 seconds or less offense, and Rose wouldn't have much of a role on the team, as he would appear in just 29 games at about 8.5 minutes per game, for a 61-21 Suns team who beat the Lakers in round 1 before losing to the Spurs in round 2, as Rose made just one brief appearance in garbage time of a Game 2 blowout win versus LA. But for the regular season, he averaged about 3.5 points, 1 rebound, and half an assist per game. But that would be Jalen Rose's last appearance in the NBA. He was probably more popular as a college freshman than he ever was in the NBA, and it's kind of unfortunate that he's best known for his time with the Fab Five. There's nothing wrong with being associated with something so influential, but it takes away from the great career that he put together. He waited patiently to get his chances in the league and was always ready when the opportunity came. His time in Denver was short-lived, but once he got to Indiana and had the right coach, he reached his full potential, as those late 90s Pacers don't have the same success without Rose. His later career years can be easily forgotten because he was playing for bad teams, but he was a veteran that could come into any situation and produce, yet didn't seem to walk around with the ego that some thought would be his downfall coming out of college. Confidence and cockiness are two different things, and what Rose possessed was confidence, and it led to him putting together a more than respectable NBA career as a great point forward, who could pass and run the offense, score quite efficiently, and had great body control and an ability to snake through the D. He became a cultural icon, yet he didn't let that become his personality. He was always a hooper first and took his game seriously, never backing down to any challenge. He didn't put up the assist numbers that the best point guards did, and he didn't score like the best wings. But few at that time could take on both of those responsibilities and perform them at an elite level, yet Jalen Rose was one of the few. But that's it for today's episode on Jalen Rose. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his brief Denver teammates, or this one on one of his teammates in Toronto. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.